And we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are in this world. This is Ram Ganesan from Dojo Live, sponsored by Encora. And I'm here joined by my wonderful colleague from Los Angeles, Tulio Siragusa, co-host of Dojo Live. And today, our wonderful guest is Matt Likens from GT Medical Technologies. He is the president and CEO there, and he comes to us from Phoenix, the Phoenix area in Arizona. And our topic for today is GammaTile therapy, a head start in the fight against brain tumors. It's a pretty serious topic, and Matt, thanks for joining us again today. Tell us a little more about STaRT and GammaTile. And before we even go there, can you just give us a brief introduction on who Matt Likens is and what your role is at GammaTile?
Yeah, sometimes people are reluctant to ask me that, Ram, because I say, so how much time do we have? You know, I was born at a very young age, and let me tell you all the interesting facts about myself, but I'll try to limit that. Frankly, I'm very proud to be in the role that I am, leading GT Medical, the creators and developers and distributors of GammaTile therapy. My career has been in healthcare and medical device field, life sciences, for more years than I care to remember, starting with Johnson & Johnson and then a number of years at Baxter Healthcare Corporation, and then the startup world. So one startup that didn't fare so well, and then a very successful startup in Arizona beginning in 2006. We had a great outcome there. I was happily minding my own business when I ran into the founders of GT Medical, and that led to this role about 3 years ago. So very excited to be here.
That's great. So wonderful. And tell us a little about GT Medical and more specifically GammaTile. I believe what you do at GammaTile is surgically targeted radiation therapy, or STaRT. So please expand on that for the audience. Educate us a little. Brain tumors are a complex topic, and I'm all ears.
Yeah, and it's actually a 10-year story, you know, so no such thing as an overnight success, right?
Of course.
And so it began really with 5 brain tumor specialists who were all co-founders of GammaTile LLC. And they were all working at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, which is one of the largest brain tumor centers in the world. And frankly, they were desperate. And why were they desperate? They were desperate for an alternative treatment for patients who may have had previous tumors that were resected, that were radiated following resection, and the tumors recurred. And often they recurred a second time, and sometimes more times than that. And at some point, they ran out of options because the previous radiation therapy that the patient had undergone left too much damage. The tissue couldn't absorb any more adjuvant radiation therapy. And without adjuvant radiation therapy, residual tumor cells will come back very quickly. So they wanted an alternative. And GammaTile is the alternative that they came up with. So so maybe I could describe what happens if you have an operable brain tumor today. Typically, you undergo a surgical procedure. So at that time, the surgeon, very skilled, right? They try to get every last tumor cell, but that's impossible. So there are always residual tumor cells left. And so today's standard of care is afterwards, after the surgery, the patient has a day or two in the hospital, and then 2 to 3 weeks at home for the surgical site to recover enough, the wound to recover, so that the patient can withstand what is sometimes weeks of daily radiation therapy. The purpose of that? Address residual tumor cells. Absolutely.
So, sounds agonizing, right? Must be very difficult once you already have gone through a tumor diagnosis and then brain surgery, and then you have to, you can't recover in peace. You have to follow up with intense radiation. Must be a huge toll on the mind and the body.
It's exhausting for the patient. And obviously someone has to drive them to their daily radiation treatments. Almost all the patients lose their hair as part of that process, which may not sound like a big deal, but the fact is that many of these patients don't have that much longer to survive, and you have up to 6 weeks of that remaining survival time taken up with these treatments. In today's age, of course, every treatment is a new exposure in either a radiation center or a hospital, where COVID obviously is a curse today, right? And so we don't want those vulnerable patients to have any more exposure than necessary. Just one other point also, GammaTile is actually placed by the neurosurgeon in the last 5 minutes of the tumor resection procedure. So maximal resection, a cavity is left, and the neurosurgeon simply tiles the floor and the wall of that cavity with GammaTiles. And I'll tell you more about what GammaTile is, but surgically close the wound, and that's it. A day or two in the hospital, and then recovered home with no need for additional radiation therapy. A much better approach, and with very impressive clinical data as well.
That's 6 weeks of trips and time and radiation saved. That's amazing.
Yeah, and of course, not every patient has 6 weeks, but even a week of daily, or 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. It all depends on the level of residual tumor cells and the number of fractions of radiation that the clinicians think are required.
So does this require more care afterwards, or do you have to go back in to remove these tiles? How does this work? And does this replace not just radiation but also chemotherapy? I mean, not that I'm an expert on cancer treatment, I just know some of these terms, but I would like to understand a little more in terms of the care regimen here. What does this do? What are the pros and cons of this?
Yeah, and so as our founders, including a noted neurosurgeon, in fact, Dr. Peter Nakaji, who's the chair of neurosciences at Banner Phoenix, which is a multi-state organization. Dr. David Brockman, who's our radiation oncology founder and our chief technology officer today, and their 3 colleagues, they actually thought through this very carefully. So the carrier, so there's a carrier, and it's a small wafer. It's about 3/4 of an inch square, and it's 4 millimeters deep. And then there are 4 radiation seeds placed very strategically, very precisely within that carrier. The carrier provides an offset, so the seeds are never in direct contact with eloquent brain tissue, but they're emitting enough radiation to be lethal to residual tumor cells. And so that carrier is made of collagen. The collagen, over a period of time, resorbs into the adjacent tissue, so it doesn't need to be removed. And so we call it an elegantly simple design. You know, I relate more to tiling one's bathroom, right? So you have that cavity, you know, that's been created by removing the tumor. Tile it, merely tile it. The precise spacing of the seeds leads to a very safe approach and a really effective dose of radiation to eliminate residual tumor cells.
Tell us a little more about this invention. How did the doctors conceive of this idea? This sounds, for the layman, just stuff from outer space. How did they come up with this? Like when you say gamma ray anything, gamma anything, it gives me Star Wars and Star Trek kind of thoughts, right? So I'm just wondering, how did they even conceive of these? These doctors must be geniuses.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to really say that publicly because you know how doctors are, but frankly they are. But they actually use the concept of brachytherapy, and brachytherapy is seed radiation therapy. It's been more frequently applied to prostate cancer in the past, and it's been very effective.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and that same concept had been tried in the brain. But it took a long time to place the seeds in, and sometimes you had seeds directly on brain tissue with way too high a dose of radiation on the surface of a seed. And so they came up with the concept, let's have a carrier. Let's make that carrier biocompatible. Let's allow it to be natural and resorb over a period of time, but still apply that lethal dose of radiation and with the structural offset. So it was really, Dave Brockman, I think, is the engineering mind behind it, even though he's a radiation oncologist. And he's a trialist also. He's participated in, he's published 50 or more scientific papers, and all of the founders really knew the literature very well and came up with this as a novel approach to allowing patients to spend more time prior to recurrences of tumor.
So, Matt, I have a question. I'm very curious to ask this question. First of all, how small are these seeds? Are they small enough where they could be implemented in a nanotechnology delivery mechanism and replace chemotherapy, for example? What's the end possibility for this technology?
Yeah, so there's a place for chemotherapy, obviously, in the treatment of cancer as well. And so radiation is a dose to try to, blunt force, eliminate those residual tumor cells. And then chemotherapy is also utilized as a more systemic approach to treating cancer and to allow, it's kind of a double punch, if you will. So the seeds, if you have a 3/4 of an inch square tile, 4 seeds in there, each 1 millimeter apart, actually. So they're very small. They're almost like the head of a pencil lead, and I can't give you the precise dimensions, but very small, but evenly spaced and equal dosimetry. But chemotherapy is available also as additional therapy following these tumor surgery procedures.
Got it. So no hair loss because of this. So this doesn't have the typical side effects that you get from radiation.
Yeah, and I think in the clinical data that was generated, over 100 patients treated, and we have about 200 patients treated commercially now because we had FDA approval in the middle of 2018. I think there's been one incident where there's been some hair loss, and that was during the clinical study at BNI. So it's not an expected outcome at all.
Definitely, in the grand scheme of things, maybe not a big outcome, but definitely something that's very positive, at least from a mental health perspective for the patients going through this ordeal, if you will.
Guys, maybe just one more point. There are approximately 170,000 patients in the U.S. each year that are diagnosed with an operable brain tumor. Wow. Okay, and after surgery, roughly 50% of those patients have a recurrence of their tumor within 12 months. I mean, the lack of improvement in the care of these patients over the last couple of decades is really a shame. And not having worked in this therapeutic space before, I've obviously learned a lot in the last 3 years. But the need for GammaTile as an option for patients, especially those who had been previously treated, is really fulfilling a tremendous need in the marketplace.
So what's the status of the therapy? Is it experimental or is it FDA approved? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, happy to do that, Tulio. So we actually, the company was turned from the LLC that the founders had to a Delaware-based corporation on October 2nd of 2017, just a little over 3 years ago. Our first mission was to raise some money. We did that in a seed round, and we wanted to raise enough to get an initial FDA clearance. And the founders had already had dialogue with the FDA, and we were in pretty good shape. We just needed to finish off biocompatibility studies and other issues. And so that first clearance was granted on July 6th of 2018. The exact label was for recurrent intracranial neoplasms. So anything in the brain and a neoplasm, any type of tumor. So it might be a metastases that came from another part of the anatomy. It might be a meningioma, which is a slower growing tumor that may or may not be malignant, but it's still an issue if it's in your brain, or it might be a glioblastoma. And that's clearly known as the most deadly, the most recurrent disease, the toughest one to overcome. So we got approval at that point for recurrent disease. And then in January of this year, we actually had applied to the FDA to get an expansion of that label, which they granted. And now we can also treat newly diagnosed tumors of any kind, as long as they're malignant. And so So it's really any of those 170,000 patients with operable tumors are now eligible to receive the benefits of GammaTile.
Are you going to go from the brain to some other organs of the body? Is that potentially possible? I mean, maybe I'm just stating something very absurd to the medical community, but I thought I'll just put it out there.
Not at all. Have you been sitting in our strategic planning sessions, Ron? Come on. You have some insight into this company.
It's coming here. It's all bugged.
Okay, so residual tumor cells are an issue in other parts of the anatomy as well, where surgery is performed and there's cleanup that's required. And there are various ways to do that, but we actually think there are opportunities outside the brain as well. Our intellectual property, the patent portfolio, actually covers not just intracranial, but every other part of the anatomy as well. And our research and development team is looking to qualify GammaTile for some of these other areas as well. We'll have studies going on in 2021 in order to try to see what the most what the targets are that could most benefit from a GammaTile approach there as well.
So Matt, this kind of progress doesn't just happen without some kind of investment in technology or use of AI to enhance discovery. How are you guys applying technology or AI or software to help the physicians and the researchers to develop new approaches that can expand beyond your initial state? Can you tell us a little bit about the investments you've made there and how that's working for you?
Yeah, I think the best example of that, Tulio, is a partnership that we formed with a software company out of the Cleveland, Ohio area. And I'm from that part of the country anyway, so I'm happy to partner with other Buckeyes. I'm not an Ohio State guy, but I'm a Kent State guy, just to clear the record. But it's the MIMS software company, and they have a great reputation in the area of radiation therapy at being able to, they have algorithms that can assess what type of radiation dose is needed. And so we have a partnership where we provide MIMS software at no charge to adopting hospitals so that they can benefit from it. And so their software can take MRI and CT scans, put it through their algorithm, and then sort out, okay, how large is the resulting cavity going to be based on the tumor that we see from those scans? And that will dictate how many GammaTiles will be required for this particular patient. And then after the procedure is done, their software is also really valuable in assessing what's the dosimetry, what type of radiation dose has been administered to residual tumor cells, how evenly was it displayed, and so what's the therapeutic value of that? Really valuable for radiation oncologists and medical physicists to understand that effect, not only for that treatment, but if they do have a recurrence, having that record and having it very precise will really help in future therapies for each patient that's treated. So I think that's the best example of, the AI world that is applied to our technology.
It's an amazing confluence of engineering and software and medical technology, if you will. I think the way you described it as that there is an engineering brain behind this and applied this very much to essentially brain surgery is the best way to describe it. I am a brain surgeon, a neurosurgeon, or radiation oncologist. How do I start using GammaTile as part of my toolkit? What's the training? What's the procedure? Is this very complex to learn? Is there a lot of hand-holding and training, or is this something I can quickly start?
Yeah, it's actually very quick to start, although there are steps in the process. And so from a neurosurgeon standpoint, the carrier material, the collagen material that I mentioned, where the seeds are embedded in that is a common product that neurosurgeons use as dural closure material for the last 15 years. It's been used in over 10 million cases, it's estimated. They have no issue with that at all. From a radiation oncology standpoint, getting cesium-131, that's the isotope that we use. It's got a 10-day half-life. And so in 6 weeks after it's delivered, 95% of that power and energy has been utilized. So getting that on your radioactive materials license as an institution, if it's not already on there, would be a step in the process. And then it's really finding the right patient. And we provide clinical support, the first 3 to 4 procedures that are done at each institution, just to make sure that it's very simple, but we don't want to take any chances. And so very straightforward. Do you have any leads for me, Ram? I mean, we actually have 30 adopting institutions currently, and we're actually beginning some new clinical studies. MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston is leading one of those studies. There will be 11 other institutions as part of that for larger newly diagnosed metastases. Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York is doing another study that's investigator initiated that they'll just do as a standalone center. And we're working on a study for newly diagnosed glioblastomas as well. So we have a very aggressive clinical development program to validate GammaTile's use and its effectiveness across the board in new studies.
Yeah, speaking of leads, right? I know of a young gentleman who was diagnosed with a neoplasm of the brain, and what are the options here for younger children or pediatrics? And what's the demographic that you're looking at, right? Like, are the outcomes different for different age groups or different type of cancers, et cetera? I'm assuming that there is a broader, I guess, overarching outcome state of just the diagnosis itself. But for GammaTile therapy specifically, is it more effective in certain kinds of people or cancers?
Yeah, and so that's great. And the fact is, we have not done a lot of work for pediatrics at this point. And so it really is we would limit it. We would recommend it for patients, 16 to 18 years and older. We do think that's an opportunity to expand the use, but we haven't done the research and the clinical studies in order to assure that it not only can it be effective, which we know it can be, but it's also safe for patients of that age. So that's another piece of work that we have to do. But as far as getting the word out, so our marketing group has an initiative that's fairly new to try to get a lot more information out into the marketplace for patients and their families to understand that there is a new option now for them. And maybe they could seek more information from their clinical team about GammaTile and whether they're the right candidate for that as an alternative to conventional therapy. And so we're very excited. We're getting a lot of incoming inquiries now from patients and their families just over the last couple of months on this. And of course, we do not answer clinical questions, but we can send them to the right clinical teams to get more information. And educating the marketplace is a big initiative for us as we move into 2021.
Got it.
Obviously, Matt, you're doing something that's purposeful and will benefit a lot of people, and it's disrupting the status quo in a field that requires it, and advancement will certainly save a lot more lives, or at least make more lives comfortable through a very difficult situation. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you joined GT Medical? You said you had an exit, you were sort of semi-retired. What prompted you to want to get back in the game and do this for you personally?
Yeah, thanks, Tulio. Well, I had a chance to spend time with the 5 founders, and I saw their, I mentioned desperation, and sometimes you think, well, gee, that's hype, but you could really get a sense of the fact that they felt like they had developed something that could really make a difference, and their only goal was to improve the lives of more patients and to have this applied. They had seen scores of patients who could have benefited from this type of technology. And so how do we get this to market as quickly as possible and have it available for as many patients as possible? And so that's really when I got a sense of that. And then, I've had a career that I think qualifies me, for large companies and small companies to do this. And I felt that this was a noble purpose. The purpose is simply to improve the lives of patients with brain tumors. So that was part of it. Another part of it is after being semi-retired for 15 months, my wife was more thrilled than anyone else knowing that I would actually be going to work every day. And then of course COVID hit, right? And so now I'm at home, and but anyway, this it felt like this met a number of needs, and the progress that we've made is unbelievable. And I was able to recruit a number of the folks who were really great contributors to the previous successful startup as well, along with others who we hadn't worked with before. The team at GammaTile, phenomenal. Take me out of it. What I'm really good at doing is bringing the right people together. Very talented folks in each function. You go to war with this team any day of the week. And so, and what I found is that almost independent of technology, the trajectory of any new organization is most dependent upon who's on the team, who's on the bus, as Jim Collins likes to say, and couldn't be more thrilled to be on the bus with this team.
Absolutely. Any plans to go international?
Absolutely, yes. We've got the program underway to try to achieve a CE mark, a Certificate of European Compliance. And then simultaneously, we're looking to get clearances in 4 other markets, including Japan, Australia, Canada, possibly even Brazil, outside the US, probably 18 to 24 months away. So we have a lot of work to do to figure out what the status is of treating brain tumors in those markets, and exactly what our channel strategy will be in order to get GammaTile deployed outside the US. But we're very excited. This is a global technology, no question about it. And often the need outside the US, especially in the developing world, where they may not be able to afford $5 and $10 million external radiation devices, this is a per procedure cost with no capital at all. So I think it could be even more attractive, in parts of the world that are still developing their brain tumor techniques.
Yeah, I think definitely changes the economics of the whole procedure, right? Because, all those visits and all those dosages, everything else that needs to be done by radiation technicians and radiation oncologists and everything else, you're reducing all of that labor by eliminating those visits, right? So that's definitely got to be great ROI here for this, in addition to the benefits for the patient.
That's right, and the significant capital investment up front, to acquire linear accelerators and the sophisticated technology that's used for external beam types of treatments. So we think we're complementary to those. So we're not trying, we're not going to put them out of business, but we do think that GammaTile can be a preferred option in many cases, or an additional option for patients.
It's interesting. I'm hearing something that happened to a lot of businesses, specifically the software business years ago, and even with Ubers and Airbnb, everything is as a service, right? You don't have to own anything. I'm hearing a little bit of medical service, practitioner as a service, where you don't have to have all these equipment. So who knows? You could be in the forefront of something even bigger and greater in terms of changing the landscape of how treatments are performed without necessarily having to own a bunch of stuff or equipment to get it done. Any words of wisdom as we come up with time that you have for just startups that are trying to also make a real difference? Like you said, this is a noble purpose for you. Any words of wisdom in terms of how to balance the demands of investors with the demands or the purpose that started this whole initiative, which was to help people and make people's lives better? Would you please share some words of wisdom on how to balance that? It sounds like as though you've done very well in doing that.
Okay, but I wasn't, nobody told me that I was supposed to be wise in this call. So I don't know if that's a fair question. I'll take a stab at it. So in addition to our corporate purpose of improving the lives of patients with brain tumors, we actually have 7 operating principles. We thought through those very carefully on the front end of this journey, because we talk about those operating principles, starting with the patient focus, customer focus, patient focus. If we really focus our resources on what's really best for these patients who need our technology, we're never going to go too far wrong. I won't go over the other 6 operating principles, but they give direction. They give additional purpose for the company. As we're making strategic decisions, we balance them against our operating principles. Are they consistent with that? Consistency is one of our operating principles. Is it going to bring the right value to our shareholders? And every one of our employees is a shareholder as well. So we have an ownership mentality in our company. We want to do right for the patient first, and everything else comes from that. I think limiting what we do, focus. We have to know when to say no. We have a lot of great possible programs, and at some point in time, they may be right for us, but we're a venture capital-backed startup company, and we have to be very careful with every dollar we spend. And that sounds trite, but it's true. It's true. And so I could go, if you have another 30 minutes, I could go on and on about the lessons learned. I've made all the mistakes. Okay. So at this point in life, I get to make sure I try not to make the same mistakes twice.
There we go. And we're up on time. Matt Likens, once again, thank you very much. Matt Likens, President and CEO of GT Medical Technologies, makers of GammaTile therapy. A new and novel invention in the areas of surgically targeted radiation therapy. Thank you very much for your time. It was a very informative and educative session. I learned a lot. I'm pretty sure Tulio's head is spinning right now with all the questions that he continues to have. I can see that in his face. But this was an amazing session. Thank you again, Matt, for your time. We wish you a wonderful holiday season and a fantastic new year.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. Tulio, really appreciate the time as well, and to be able to talk a little bit about GammaTile. So great holidays to you as well, and I hope we can do this again sometime. It's really fun. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. So as we go off the air, why don't you just stay on for a 5-minute debrief? We can quickly just chat